Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to today's Hindu News Analysis session for 18th March 2024, and we have picked up important articles for you from the perspective of UPSC Mains as well as Prelims, a total of 7 articles here, taken from the Hindu New Delhi edition of today. So, before going deeper into the articles, a broad look of the newspaper says that the detailed articles today are very diverse in nature, ranging from the dangers that artificial intelligence is posing democracy across the globe, right up to the problem of climate responsibility, going up to the new notion of transforming Indian education, all the way to Myanmar conflict. Besides, we shall do a quick read of certain articles which are very factual from the prelims perspective. For example, how the EU, the European Union, has invested majorly in Egypt. The reasons, repercussions. We will talk about a very interesting analysis on the HbA1c test that is often conducted to judge the level of blood glucose, again pointing out to the massive increase in diabetes in India. And the last article for the day is very fascinating. It is taken from Science. It talks about a new research thrown up by an observatory, a laboratory that is housed in Antarctica, that is backed by Europe, and it is doing its research into a very interesting phenomena known as neutrino. So with all these diverse outlooks, let's begin with the first article of the day. This has been picked up from page 6 and it corresponds to GS Paper 2 Polity. We are talking about a very new threat, that is casting its shadow on democratic elections across the world. We know that India is not the only country which is all set for its 2024 elections to the Lok Sabha, but also there are many countries across the world, near about 50 such, who shall have an election campaign, who shall have an electoral process within 2024. Although elections across the globe have been marred by inappropriate information, by booth capturing, by voter hijacking, by ideologies, conflicts, and so on. But today in 2024, we are witnessing a very new real threat, and this is coming from artificial intelligence. Yes, the same AI which can give multitude new options in the field of medical science, education, astronomy, today has opened up a new fear, and that is, will modern day elections be captured by the dangers of artificial intelligence and a newer form of AI that is known as generative AI. So that is what the article talks about. The main focus of the article is that with India all set to conduct its 7-phase general election. Now yesterday, the Election Commission of India has also given its notification regarding the election campaign that will be rolled across the country beginning from April 19th until June 1st. Let's also remember that this is the second longest time. In fact, this is the second time we are having such a huge, long election duration. But then it's not just India. As I said, there are multiple countries of the world, including, say, for example, Mexico, UK, near about 50 such nations, which shall be having an electoral process between 24 and 2025. And now what's the real threat? The real threat is generative artificial intelligence. So what do we mean by generative artificial intelligence? We all know that whenever a machine is expected to copy, mimic the neural pathways of human brain to deliver a kind of thinking, a kind of sophisticated output which a human brain earlier could only have processed, we call this AI. But today we are talking about the generative AI, which is a more sophisticated aspect of AI, which can be used to generate newer kind of content ranging from music videos to imagery to content, ideas that can be very realistic. Sometimes they create fake ideas or fake images, which we also today call as the deep fakes, that looks so real that it is very difficult for a layperson to actually identify that they are false. Now this is threatening the governments across the world. Just 4 days before, European Union has categorically prohibited, they have taken back the freedom given to certain social media platforms, including the TikTok, Facebook, and other 6 such social media platforms. And they have asked them to control and keep a strict eye on the kind of content that people are generating on them. Why? Because most of the countries are now ready for the election. Now, similarly, the Indian government has also, just on this previous Friday, it has, under the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, it has told many companies to stop releasing free content. It has told them, companies which are generating algorithms, LLMs, and such kind of deep fake media content, they have been strictly told to stop releasing such content unless the content is getting appropriate labeling to show whether the content is reliable or unreliable. Why governments across the world are getting so scared suddenly? The reason is chatbots, ChatGPT, the Google-backed Gemini, Copilot, all these are being used in so many fields today that the Generation Z, today's generation, is depending for most of the information on these platforms. In fact, it has taken over the thinking ability of humans, right from a school student to a college researcher to employees across various corporates, even government officers. They often resort to chatbots and AI models to get information on any topic that they want to. It is the most summarized, it is the most easy, relevant information on the face of it. But in reality, there is something that is happening which people do not know about. How many of us understand that most of this information sometimes is not true? It is not taken from the right source. It can be very, very misleading. Now today, as we are proceeding towards another chapter of elections, we are worried that what if these are known as deep fake elections? Why the deep fake elections? Because it is becoming like a pandemic now, the deep fake technology. We can call it the deep fake syndrome. There are multiple ways in which it is harming democracy. The very first way is that recently we knew that when Pakistan has conducted its much controversial election, the results shocked many. 2 leaders emerged victorious. Now, how was that possible? Now, one of the very prominent leaders there, Mr. Imran Khan, claimed that his party has won. That is when he was in prison that time. So it was his supporters, a lot of people who were pro his party. They started staging propaganda on social media with the use of AI, which released fake results, it seems. Similarly, it is not unknown that leaders like Donald Trump have been seen fighting the police, or for that matter, Indian celebrities, doing things which they claim they have never done. So it is very, very dangerous because one thing is it leads to defranchisement. What do we mean by that? Now we know that everybody in a democracy, in a mature democracy, for example India, has a right to cast their vote irrespective of their gender, caste, religion, whatever. They have to be a minimum, that is 18 years of age, for doing that. This is known as the right to cast your franchise. We believe in the universal adult franchisee. It is today the deepfake election syndrome that is endangering this process. It is leading to defranchisement of people. People are refraining from giving votes. Why? Because sometimes there are unnecessary threats being just created on social media, that there is a danger of communal violence, there is a danger of political instability, there is police. Paramilitary has been deployed. In many countries, people have been discouraged to come out and give votes only because they were afraid that it could lead to some violence. They were under threat. Similarly, sometimes it leads to false or fake propaganda. For example, opposition parties can easily target each other today. Various rival political parties target one another by releasing content, images, videos of their rivals, engaging in controversial acts which they in fact have not done, but people would easily buy that because it's so realistic. Similarly, another problem is influencing the voter mindset. Now, a matured voter is supposed to make a decision regarding casting their franchise in the most informed way. It is experiential as well as informative, but today in the era of generative AI, it's very dangerous because fake ideologies are emerging. Sometimes political parties themselves, now it's very, very common in US right now that political parties are actually doing things like they are contacting voters through robocalls. where the voters are encouraged to vote for a respective political party. Similarly, sometimes they are contacting voters through emails, through videos, through secret images regarding their opponents, which may not be true, but they are sufficient enough to impact the voter's mind. At the same time, sometimes they are advertising massively. They are claiming to do achievements which they have not done. So all these things are creating a very, very fake propaganda, which is not real at all. So what does a voter do? For today's voter, it's very difficult to make an informed choice, therefore, to whether differentiate between the right, what is correct, and something that is absolutely incorrect. Now, as the article says, disinformation and misguiding the voter through fake election campaigns, through fake kind of, you can say, conversing has happened before. But today, since it is all done through AI, it's very, very quick and the reach is very real. In real time, people can target millions of users across the globe. So that is the real danger here. Apart from that, creation of near realistic images of something that does not exist is taking the experience to a whole new level. For example, the article talks about AI determinism, which is a future that is impacted majorly by artificial intelligence. Now, millions of people, as we know, are tuning into AI. They are using tools like the chatbot and the Gemini and many other to even understand how does election process work. Now, for example, I do not know. What does it mean to cast my vote? I want to upload certain details regarding my identity card, or maybe I want to understand the ideology of a particular political party for making a good decision about yes or no, to select them or to not vote for them. Now, in that case, if I use AI tools, I am not assured of the right information. Sometimes I may get such a false and misleading information that I would end up wasting my vote. Or for that matter, I would never go and cast my vote. Or sometimes it might happen that I am given a very false information even regarding my destination. Where am I supposed to go and do my registration, and petty details like that, which are very, very big when it comes to impacting the ground level user. So in that light, today, these products actually, unless they are unreliable or untested, they have been prohibited by the Indian government of being released online. So let's also believe that this process of franchising the voters is also threatening the hardcore basis of democracy. So how does India handle this threat today? Just like many other countries are. So as India is also proceeding towards the election, and also we are very, very digitally advanced. We are in fact on top when it comes to using AI and regenerative AI. But let's understand that the people as well as the government, before using AI for every small and big thing, must understand its benefits and weigh them against the difficulties that it poses. Similarly, utmost caution should be utilized when you garner information or take information through an chatbot or through any AI predicted model. Please do cross-verify that. That's what the article talks about. Article says that digital public goods could be benefit as well as it could be a huge curse, because sometimes, just like it has happened in India, say back in 2013 during the Muzaffarnagar riots, or maybe it happened when some people from Northeast India were targeted in many Indian states. It also happened recently in the ongoing Manipur controversy between two tribes, that fake videos and fake imageries became so potential that they led to full-blown communal violence at a large scale. Now, something like that happening right before the election would mean huge cost for India. So that's what the article pitches for, a very systematic, a very controlled, and a very government-monitored use of AI, especially during sensitive period of 2024 as we head towards another election. Now, on that note, let's proceed with another article. This is page 8, Environment, and we are talking about something that is not new. A dispute that is age-old, which actually sparked off initially back in 1960s and 70s itself. The debate is it fair that when it comes to creating a huge carbon footprint, it is the developed industrial nations of the West who do it at a massive scale? They have a huge emission. They are the ones who also have a massive carbon footprint. But then when it comes to mitigate the crisis, when it comes to creating strategies for adaptation, why does the burden fall unduly on the shoulders of lesser developed and lesser industrialized countries. Now, this is the kind of injustice that we are talking about. In fact, a word that the article does not directly use, but I'm sure you will relate to it. This, in a way, becomes ecological. Imperialism. It is a two-way process. So, typically, the core of the article says that recently there has been a study that was done by IPCC using a special methodology that we shall talk about in the article. That research or that study has highlighted that while it is the developed industrial nations who are contributing so much, they are contributing very heavily to carbon emissions, to greenhouse gas emissions. But when it comes to taking care of climate mitigation, somehow it is always the developing countries who are facing pressure day after day. So it is a two-way imperialism. On the one hand, it is the industrialized nations who create climate problems, and the poor countries are a victim to that. Now let's understand that whenever there is a climate-induced crisis that happens, it could be in the form of flooding or drought, it could be in the form of massive heat wave to deforestation to probably something like acid rain or a pandemic. It always impacts the poor people more disproportionately. Now today, as we are talking about Indian cities who are experiencing water deficiency. Say, for example, just 3 years back we spoke of Shimla. Today we speak of Bangalore. Just a few years back we were talking about Cape Town in South Africa. So every time such a episode erupts, it is always the countries of Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa and South America who will bear maximum brunt of climate problem, and not the developed countries. But when it comes to solving the problem, once again, it is the developing countries or the lesser industrialized countries who are given maximum responsibilities. Is that fair? That is a question that the article talks. Also, the article highlights two arguments that we shall talk about shortly. So beginning with the article, we talk about the IPCC, that is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, a body that was created under World Meteorological Organization and UN Environmental Program, say back in 1988. The main purpose of this body is to advance or to propagate scientific knowledge about climate change that is resultant of anthropogenic activities. Now we know that anthropogenic means any activity that is done by human, and all anthropogenic activities, right from commercialization, concretization, to deforestation, to abuse of natural resources, to rapid urbanization, all these activities have created the climate crisis we are living and breathing in today. So what does the article say? Now the critical issue highlighted by the article is that the IPCC, this body, has just done a study in which it has examined 500 future emission samples from various countries across the globe. Once they were analyzed and monitored, they were studied through various dimensions. They were studied under topics such as how to reduce carbon dioxide emission, how to reduce emission that happens from burning of fossil fuels, and how to encourage carbon sequestration. Now, carbon sequestration is a word which means how to reverse the emission of carbon dioxide by probably planting such trees who absorb maximum carbon dioxide, and in return they generate oxygen. So the process of absorbing CO2 and giving out oxygen is referred to as sequestration. So that is what the article talks about. Now the study, when it compared more than 556 case studies, seeing and comparing different countries regarding how much energy is used in different countries across the world. What is the income or per capita income level in each of these countries? How are the poor countries generating much lesser emissions as compared to the developed countries? And now the result of the study shows that the injustice or the disparity between industrial versus industrializing, developed versus developing, is continuing. It shall continue unstopped until 2050. That much injustice has already been done. All this data, all this study was done via the IPCC assessment report. Now, what is IPCC assessment report? IPCC's assessment report typically works through 3 working group submissions or 3 working group projects. One is on physical science, the other is climate adaptation, and the third talks about how to solve the climate problem, mitigation of climate crisis. So, one synthesis report later comes which consolidates and amalgamates. It includes the findings of all three separate reports, and this report then later is resulted in the form of something that we call as IPCC's latest, in fact the 7th assessment report, the AR7. So what does that report point out to? The report says that IPCC has used a special technology known as modeled pathways, which shall be used to see how long will it take to limit the warming of Earth's surface. How long will we take as human species to control global warming? And now it says that it is a very, very complex and complicated process. Why is it so complicated? Let's understand it by two variables. One thing is that across the globe, every country has a different level of forest cover, different level and type of vegetation, different population, different per capita income, different industrialization, as well as different consumption patterns. If there is so much variation from one country to another, then how can we say that all of them should take a joint climate action? It's a farce. It's not true. Why? Let's understand with two dynamics. One very important thing to understand is that typically just about 10 years ago, the world was focusing on something referred to as carbon trading. It became a very, very well-known concept that time, which means the richer countries could create more carbon emission, more greenhouse gas emission, and the poor countries shall be able to purchase the rights to actually generate any emission. This was done under a system of carbon rating, which means that countries will be rated as per their emission standards, and the richer countries obviously have more money, so they can buy more credits and then they can release more gases, while poor countries can afford much lesser, so they do not have any right to create emissions. This was a clear-cut case of environmental injustice and imperialism. It is so paradoxical. On the one hand, developing countries anyways create less emission, and then comes the concept of carbon rating, which means further you are putting on their shoulders the blame of controlling the whole emission game. Second thing comes in the form of waste offshoring. Now, a phenomena which most people are aware of, that most of the times the highly industrialized countries, they are transporting the leftover products of industrialization. It could be in the form of some heavy metal garbage. It could be in the form of certain products that are still usable in the developing countries. It could be in the form of raw materials which now the poor countries will use to further do some manufacturing. But for the developed countries, they are spent material. They are used material. They are considered as waste. Now this is often transported to the poor countries and they can take any action on it. They can leave it for disposal. They can recycle it if they want to. They can reuse it if they want to. Rather, they can simply, directly also use it for certain purposes if it meets their needs. Now, typically this waste is very, very dangerous because not only it is very toxic, it is also carcinogenic. It is also comprising heavy metals. So what are we trying to do? So in the wake of reducing the burden of waste disposal and emission that comes as a part of recycling, disposing, or for that matter, reusing, all of that then is transported on the shoulders of the developing countries. So not only are they inheriting more carbon emission, not only are they importing more waste disposal problem, but also various kinds of ecological pollutions and health crisis. So you see, these are the two ways in which the entire neo-environmental imperialism model works, which is very, very unfair, and that's what the article talks about. The article also says that what we need today is not a unified, a global action towards climate change. A global action indeed, but a global action that is very, very varied. A global action that has a degree of customization, where the developed countries need actually to take more action, not only to control their emission, but also to help the developing countries in coping up with the problems of climate change. Why? Because most of the times the deforestation that has happened in the countries of Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa has been done by the multinational corporations that are housed in the Western countries. So you see, poverty once again becomes a double burden on the poor countries, and hence one consolidated program will not help anyone. So therefore, what the article says is that per capita GDP, or the per capita gross domestic product, in a simpler way, per capita income of people in sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, West Asia, together is about 60% of world's population. And the sad part is it is still below the global average, even it will be in 2050. So if there is such a massive inequality between the so-called global north and the so-called global south, then how can we talk about a unified climate action? That's not possible. Similarly, another interesting thing found out by the article was that maximum amount of climate mitigation can be done through carbon sequestration, which means more forests you grow, more vegetation you are creating, the more carbon will be sequestered. More oxygen will be released on the planet. But what we are seeing here is that, again, developing countries have a much higher forest cover as compared to developed countries. So once again, it's a clear-cut proof that developing countries are the ones who are already into more carbon sequestration. Another thing is, poor countries continue to not only therefore bear the duty of mitigating climate change, but also the kind of side effect that they are facing because of carbon emission done by the developed countries. So now the report says that the responsibility of the global north cannot be disregarded. If it is, then we will not be able to achieve any of the SDGs, let alone 2030, even by 2050, specifically when we talk about providing clean, safe drinking water, equal urbanization, similarly reducing our carbon footprint and moving towards greener technologies. Also, another thing mentioned by the article slightly tacitly is that when you talk about green technologies, when you talk about renewable sources of energy, whether it be solar power or whether it be the green ammonia, green hydrogen, all these are also easily taken up by the developed countries. Why? Because the cost of processing them is very high. So imposing these policies on developing countries is not going to help. In fact, it is the developed countries who should provide some hands holding to the developing countries for enabling such technologies within them. Now today, if you see the highest carbon footprint makers, then in the list you will have the first names as US and China. Of course, India also today is regarded as a major industrializing country, but typically it is the EU countries, US and China who constitute as the major emitters. So unless a more equalizing policy is done, overall climate change mitigation will not be possible in the near future. Also because equality is a principle that is indoctrinated in the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which we call as UNFCCC. The Article 3 of UNFCCC says that all the countries who are signee to this protocol should protect climate change for the benefit of present future of the humankind on the basis of equality. So equality is a very important concept, therefore, which is not being done. Apart from that, we also have to understand that the approach towards climate mitigation has to be differentiated and should be put on different countries on the basis of their different respective capacities. So that is something typically that the article talks about, that today whatever actions are being done are not very democratizing. Let's control this kind of imperialism and let's follow the protocols when they talk about equal responsibility to be shouldered by everyone. With this, we proceed with the third article of the day. This is page 17, and this talks about education. Recently, we have been having many articles on education. The time is now ripe for us to actually implement and think about the National Education Policy 2020. We know that India has not had many education policies. In fact, the 2021 is third of its own kind. The first was 1968, then 86, and then 2020. So indeed, it is revolutionary. It is also a wake-up call to most policy makers in education sector. So what does this article say which is so different? The article is titled Not That Easy, because yes, we are talking about a very ambitious proposal by the government of India and education policy makers in the government who say that now Indian society, rather Indian education system, should move towards open examinations. When I say open examinations, we mean to say open book examinations, where the students shall be provided access to materials such as notebooks and books while writing the exam. Now to some it seems like a very revolutionary idea, but it has had a very try-led response. One, from the students themselves. Two, on the part of teachers and educators. And three, from the government and policy makers. At the level of student, it comes as a happy thing. Students are saying that if we have access to open books or material during exam, definitely we do not have to mindlessly learn or cram too much through rote learning methodology. We can focus only on analytical topics, and where you talk about definitions or data, that can be copied from the book, which will enhance our answer, and hence we can get better marks. It will also support some students who have slight learning disabilities. So overall, they feel it's a win-win situation. Talking about the teachers. Now, the teachers have something different to say. For teachers, it becomes a more controversial thing. Why? Because for teachers, it is not something as easy. For teacher, it needs a complete overhauling of our pedagogy, a complete change of our classroom teaching method itself. How and why? One thing is that the whole reason behind the concept of open book exam is not to enable students to get better marks. The whole purpose is to change the concept and the purpose of learning in India. Because for a very long time, in our society, like many other societies, the concept of education focuses on students learning content. In most of the subjects, even science for that matter, students are required to actually understand and grasp everything that is given in the textbook, the curriculum textbook, and then reproduce that to their maximum ability in the exam. Now, the closer the answer is to the textbook, the better marks a student gets. That is the standard conventional rote learning method, but today the government feels that from this model of conventional rote learning, let's move towards an analytical learning system, where in the classrooms you are not going to teach the students only from the textbook. The content is not going to be static anymore. If we want our students to solve real world problems in the coming generations, today we talk about AI, smart learning, the focus is so that students can handle real life problems. And how will that happen unless the entire teaching system changes? And how should we do that? Now today the system demands a kind of situation where teachers will be facilitating the students into concepts which they can learn, and during the examination they will not solve a question paper. They will solve certain case studies or certain situational problems. They will conduct experiments. They will create sensory materials to probably create a small piece of robotic, to probably create a small project that is an appropriate display of how much a student has understood and how much of this learning will benefit him in the longer run in life. So this is something that the article is trying to pitch for, and hence the teachers are in a very dilemma-like situation. One thing, it will increase the energy and time in teaching, you can say, job. Why? Because the teachers will not only now have to correct copies, or not only they have to examine the answers and the responses of so many students, which will today, after the system is done, be diverse. In the conventional model, most students will write similar answers, and the closer they are to the original content, the better marks will be given. But today, when it is about problem solving and case study based exams, every individual student will have a different unique answer. Hence, teachers will have to invest more time and energy in judging all of those responses. It will also be done on a one-on-one basis. Why? Because the student has to understand where he or she has made mistake. Apart from that, even teaching pattern will change. You cannot have the board and the, you can say, chalk and board learning anymore, because now the students will have to get some kind of smart classroom enabled services. They will have to be presented with learning models, rather materials which they can touch and feel. So the teachers will also have to undergo a whole new level of training to provide such a learning. So this is the idea behind it. And the All India Council for Technical Education, the AICTE, in their examination reform policy back in 2018, had also encouraged the adoption of open book examinations, at least in the higher education sectors, in the higher education institution. The purpose is to develop skills such as analyzing, innovation, creativity, problem solving, and deeper understanding, and not rote learning. This will be more ability enhancing. So the entire idea is also very close to the concept of Bloom's taxonomy. Now under Bloom taxonomy, we divide the whole learning process into 6 aspects which focus around creating, evaluating, analyzing, applying, understanding, and then remembering. Otherwise, in the conventional system, we only focus about remembering. But today, not like that. The belief is that if a student is able to achieve the first 5 steps, then automatically the last step will continue for a lifetime. So it is about constructive learning, that yes, the whole idea is that even if you have a book open in front of you, you can't cheat. You can't cheat. Why can't you cheat? Because the questions are not made in such a way that cheating will help you. Even if there is an open book in front of a student, unless he or she is well prepared with the concept, unless he or she can create a solution to a logical case study and a real problem with innovation, the student can't take any help from the book. The only help that the book might provide is probably some idea that you might get. But for that also you will have to be very well prepared from the book months before. So last minute cheating or looking at the book is not helping in this kind of system, and that's where it is a differentiator. It will increase more self-awareness. It will inculcate responsibility. Otherwise, until the last moment, the students delay. And they feel we just have to pass the exams. They go to the books, they cram, they learn, and they reproduce it. They get marks and they pass. Today, it will not happen like that. Until across the entire academic year, a student has done experiments, laboratory experiments when it's science, or case study problems, on-ground case study evaluations, the student will never be prepared to write the exam. And hence only those people will progress who have actually done some kind of cognitive understanding of the topic. And therefore, the questions will also be in such a way that the students have to relate with the issue more deeply. And hence, this kind of thorough preparation will not demand any kind of cheating or last minute book input. So that's the whole idea of the system. There are certain challenges in implementing it. The biggest challenge is teachers have to be very well trained. Today, the kind of pedagogy practice we have, a teacher is more of a passive facilitator. In this, a teacher has to become an active facilitator. Why? Because she has to enable students to conduct experiments and do case studies and be innovative rather than telling them passively, and that's all. Apart from that, students will develop critical thinking, and therefore teachers will also have to have a deep critical thinking to tell students, to teach them to do that. Similarly, there is one more problem. We shall need to implement better smart classroom techniques across all the schools and colleges. That is about expenses. There's one more issue. Infrastructurally also, we need bigger spacious classrooms, because when so many students are doing a case study or an experimental innovative problem, they might need more materials to do that. It will not happen in the standard question answer format. And hence, more materials would need bigger classrooms, more accommodative classrooms, better surveillance during exams. Plus, at the same time, we also need much more trained people who can create such kind of questions, curriculum, and hence evaluation later on. So therefore, today we need more learning material, teaching material, infrastructure, digital enabled infrastructure. So all these are certain things which will be expensive. They will demand more investment in education, but in the longer run, definitely the results as per the government will be very promising, because we will create a whole new generation which is way more innovative and way more smart when it comes to using the benefits of whether it is AI or any other development that today we talk about. On that note, let's proceed with the article on page 6. This corresponds to Myanmar, and hence it's an IR issue. So again, it's not new when we talk about the Myanmar civil war. We know that the entire mess began long back. Initially, even when Myanmar, previous Burma, got its independence, from the very outset of its becoming an independent country, it was rife in communal ethnic violence where minority communities, tribals, have experienced lots and lots of intra-society wars, lots and lots of insurgencies. But the article picks up the point of 2021 when the latest coup happened in Myanmar, or the military civil war happened in Myanmar. From then onwards, the situation has constantly deteriorated. So today, the key focus of this article is that how after 2021, when the Myanmar Janta, or the Myanmar army, which is popularly known as the Tatmadaw, once it retaliated against the civilian government, once it ousted or once it overthrew the established democratically elected National League for Democracy government, the constant war is there for all to see. So not only is it causing huge internal problems in Myanmar, but also it is causing a spillover effect in neighborhood countries. Bigger problem that the article highlights is that the media people or the journalists in Myanmar, those who really want to raise a free voice, those who want to literally talk about the truth and the reality that's happening there, are all silenced. Most of the times either by Janta, or they become victims of the ongoing war between the Janta and the local ethnic war armies. So today what is happening, even when countries across the world are appealing to forums like ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, to come and create some negotiation, which it had done long back in the form of a 5-point consensus, but that also did not succeed in bringing any peace. Chinese government also had mediated some kind of peace and negotiation between the Janta and the pro-democracy fighters, but that was also temporary, it did not succeed. Hence, what is the result? It is becoming not just a national but a regional problem in the entire South Asia. That's the key pitch made by the article. Now let's understand that back in February 2021, when the democratically elected government, the National League for Democracy, was there in power, and there was certain semblance of peace and stability in the long conflicted Myanmar, the military junta ousted it. It overthrew it in a very ruthless, in a very unjustified kind of military coup, and then the Tatmadaw, as we call it, or the military junta, came to the power, which was a complete snatching of power. Not only snatching of power, imprisonment of various pro-democracy senior leaders. Similarly, suppression of media freedom and huge violence against the minorities of the country. For example, back in 2014-15, we saw the Rohingya crisis. Once again, they became severe victims of military junta's suppression at that time. Similarly, famous leaders like Aung San Suu Kyi, they have been in prison for like immemorial period of time now. So that's what the article argues, that ever since the State Administration Council, another fancy name which the Janta uses for itself, when it came to power and established itself on the throne, obviously there was a massive resistance by the people themselves. So not only did the pro-democracy leaders fighting ideologically, the Janta, but also the local communities of Myanmar who are fed up with this violence. These ethnic groups themselves became self-defense units. They became militias or military units who started massively fighting the Janta. For a long period of time now, people of Myanmar are suffering. On the one hand, because of the attacks that are constantly conducted by the Janta itself. Second, because of the ongoing fighting between the Janta and the local armed ethnic rebel groups. So these are the two kind of conflicts which have completely crushed any scope for social economic development. Similarly, the conflict also sometimes pours across Myanmar's border. Now it's good to remember how recently in February 2024, the Indian government stopped the free movement regime between Myanmar and India. Why? Why was the decision taken? The 1643 kilometers border was decided to be fenced so that people or the locals on either side of the border do not enter into each other's country. Earlier, under the FMR, people could, from both sides, would have travelled at least 16 kilometers on either side of the border without needing any paperwork or visa. It had to be stopped because the Janta warfare and extremism was also spilling into India. Sometimes the movement was joined, it found avid support in many tribes that are settled in the northeast states of India. Let's remember that although the countries today are separate political divisions, but long before such a division was made, all this area represented the same ethnic tribal group more or less. And therefore, today also there is tribal solidarities, unity on either sides of the border. And hence, therefore, sometimes there is support for the pro-democracy fighters in the Indian borders. Sometimes there is extremism created by Janta in the northeast part of India, which further fuels instability, and therefore it had to be stopped. Similarly, China has been taking strict action on Myanmar refugees. Let's remember that even for China, there is this Yunnan province where so many refugees from Myanmar currently stay. So China has also been a very active participator in the entire imbroglio that's going on in Myanmar. Similarly, countries like Thailand, Bangladesh, the Chin area, all of them have been experiencing spillovers of the conflict, which is not only dangerous for political sake, but also it inhibits any kind of economic prospect, any kind of smooth trade and travel in that area as well. So these problems have also defaulted any economic corridors that had been promised between India and Myanmar. So situation on the ground today is such that most of the journalists are getting suppressed. Most of them either imprisoned. Most of them today who are working with regards to Myanmar's situation are actually finding refuge in neighboring countries outside Myanmar, from where they are conducting their media agenda. So you see, there is absolute zero freedom of media or press in the current situation. So this massive movement of journalists who are coming out of Myanmar is quite similar like the situation of about 1.5 million refugee seekers from Myanmar were forced to abandon their homes after the 2021 coup. Similarly, the 2015 Rohingya refugee crisis, who all migrated into Bangladesh-India borders, is something that we all are aware about. Similarly, estimates say that more than half of Myanmar's population, about 25 million people, live in abject dire poverty. So the result is, situation is very, very destabilizing. Now, similarly, most of the countries in the West have imposed sanctions, which further means more poverty and lesser imports for people of Myanmar. Now, China has been a key player in the area. For long, China was trying to negotiate a peace between the junta and the ethnic rebels. The primary reason why China was interested in a peace like that was to encourage trade, which happens generally between the border of Yunnan province, which is a Chinese province, and it's in borderline of Myanmar. So to facilitate trade, because a lot of investment has been done by China in this region, to propagate that, China was also interested in buying peace in the area. Apart from that, whenever there is a fight between the junta and the ethnic people, it also creates violence and severe refugee influx in China's borders too. But the peace that was purchased by China was very temporarily. Similarly, even ASEAN, as I said, it created a 5-point consensus on creating some peace between both the parties in Myanmar. But again, that was broken. Most parties did not attend it. Most people from the junta refused to participate and refused to let their leaders participate in forums like ASEAN itself. So the reality today is that a lot of offensives are constantly being conducted. For example, we can talk about the very, very famous offensive that was conducted, the 1027 offensive. It was a huge military attack that was launched by the local ethnic armed group, or a three-party ethnic armed local community of Myanmar, which is sometimes also known as the Three Brotherhood Alliance, on the military junta. This all happened typically in the northern part of Myanmar, the Shan and the Rakhine province. But again, the fight has just further devastated the situation. Now, in 2021, European Union, US, United Nations were all requesting ASEAN to play a major role in creating some kind of peace. But as I said, the peace was very, very short-lived. Now, nearly 600 resistance groups have emerged ever since the 2021 coup was done by the junta. And as I said, the offensive that was launched by the ethnic Three Brotherhood Alliance further only kept on creating violence and intimidation. So the Three Brother Alliance also often finds support from China. But the reality is that today the situation is more than about 40% of townships across the country of Myanmar are all war zones. 316 of total 330 townships are experiencing active fighting all the time. And this is the data of 2023. So today, what can be the best possibility? Well, the best possibility is somehow trying to create some kind of situation where independent press council can be enabled, so that at least the real situation is highlighted in the global forum. Apart from that, somehow the military regime has to be replaced by some kind of a pro-democracy regime. And although these are far cries from the modern day reality, but these probably are also the only solution of this social economic instability of the region. The next article is page number 13. We are talking about IR again. Now, just yesterday, the European Union has infused massive amount of funding to Egypt, nearly about 7.4 million euros. The reason is to create more energy investment in Egypt. Apart from that, also handle the refugee crisis of Egypt. Let's remember, the EU's main interest behind this is one, that Europe has seen a lot of refugees who are just pouring into European countries. But where are they coming from? Typically, most of them are coming from the conflict-induced countries in the African region, and most of them find a very, very easy route from Egypt. Now, from there, they begin this long sea journey, which ultimately ends in Europe. So, Egypt often becomes a corridor for the refugees of the sub-Saharan African regions, all the countries such as the DCR, such as Sudan, such as Niger, Malawi, or Guinea. All these countries who have been constantly experiencing more than 2 military coups in just the previous 3 years have experienced hunger, displacement, constant warfare, and displacement humanitarian crisis. So where do people go? Initially, Egypt was an easy destination for most refugees coming from Syria, coming from other countries, neighbor countries of sub-Saharan Africa, Libya primarily. Also, now given the Israel-Palestine conflict, so many refugees from Gaza were also pouring into the area. But already we all are aware from history about the Suez Canal crisis that happened historically. So Egypt's economic situations have not been very stable. Today also, despite having huge reserves of oil, gas, minerals, Egyptian economy is in tatters. And the reality gets worsened because of ongoing refugees that are constantly pouring in. So this aid by the EU comes in the light of both these things. One is to enable Egypt to manage its financial crisis. Two, so that Egypt can now invest more in fencing in borders with most of its neighboring countries. So that if they do not come to Egypt, probably the refugee influx in Europe will also get reduced. So the package includes both grants and loans for the next 3 years into a country which is in fact Arab world's most populous country. The two sides have also spoken about becoming soon a strategic partner. So the Egypt-EU cooperation will now be economic as well as non-economic, such as we spoke about immigration, migration, and refugee crisis. So EU will provide massive money to Egypt to fence its borders, fortify it from Libya. Why? Because it becomes a major exchange point for most of the migrants from very, very high poverty hit countries. Now here we talk about Sudan as well, apart from other which we just discussed, who flee and they enter Egypt. Some of them stay back, but most of them, even after getting discouraged by the conditions within Egypt, the ongoing poverty, they then think of migrating into Europe. So therefore, Egypt has surfaced as a prominent area for refugee migration from the sub-Saharan African countries in the previous few decades. And since it becomes a very easy channel for most of these people to cross Mediterranean and then enter into Europe, today's investment by the EU comes in the light of discouraging its own refugee crisis or its own refugee problem, the spillover that it is experiencing. So Egypt is a destination country for refugees that come across from Middle East as well as East Africa. So not only sub-Saharan Africa, also from the Middle Eastern countries. Now, as far as the data goes, just in December 2023, there were more than 472,000 registered refugees in Egypt from 60 different countries, including the countries of the Sahel region. Apart from that, Sudan, Syria, and yes, the ongoing Gaza Strip as well. So to encourage Egypt from stopping all kinds of refugees from coming inside stronger fortified borders, the money has recently come in. So now we proceed with an article that's page 9, once again Science and Tech. And this talks about the sheer importance of the blood test or the blood examination method known as HbA1c. It is primarily conducted to investigate, to monitor the levels of insulin or the blood sugar in human body, blood glucose in human body, but it is a very revolutionary intervention. It's not like from history we were depending on it. For a very long time, only two other, fasting blood glucose and the food or the post-food consumption blood glucose levels were monitored. But ever since this particular HbA1c popularized across the world, it was a very big change in the way we see the problem of diabetes itself. So let's talk about why is it important and what is such great thing about this particular blood test that it is becoming so critical for the medical industry today. So let's imagine that whether you blame it upon the legacy of Green Revolution, a high carbohydrate diet intake, whether you blame it upon Western food culture, or whether you blame it upon poverty, it's true that India today has an estimated about 10.13 crore people who are living with diabetes. Now, clearly, either type 1 diabetes, which is genetic and hence slightly rare. But today the kind of burden that we are talking about is more of type 2 diabetes, which is not genetic, but it develops as a lifestyle disorder. Often it comes in conjunction with hypertension and obesity or chronic stress syndrome, all these which characterize modern life pretty effectively. So by a study published in 2023, another 13.6 crore people in fact are, if not diabetic, they are pre-diabetic, which means they already have insulin resistance. They have too high level of insulin in their blood, and very soon the insulin shall not be able to regulate or control the blood glucose from spiking up. Now, once the blood glucose gets dissolved or it gets attached to the RBCs become stiff. If an RBC or a red blood cell becomes very stiff and hard, it cannot flow through the thin veins and arteries of human body. If it cannot flow, what happens? It goes and it starts creating blockages, or it deposits as some kind of a tartar, some kind of a white deposit. Typically, people would associate this with a cholesterol problem, but today we realize no, most of the inter-arterial damage is also as a result of high blood glucose and the stiffening and thickening of blood cells. This is what the article talks about, that India accounts for 17% of all the diabetes patients across the world. So therefore, if we talk about prevention and early detection as twin strategies to tide over this problem, then today this particular test in highlight HbA1c is doing wonders to combat the problem. Why is it different? Because initially it was discovered in 1955 and it was not into popular medical practice until 1968. Recently, the American Diabetes Association also approved this test as a massive diagnostic tool for diabetes in 2009. After 2011, safely, most countries are now depending on the reading of this test alone. Why is it different? It is very different because the conventional tests which were focusing on fasting type blood glucose or post-food consumption blood glucose were only measuring spikes in a very short period of time. That is immediately before eating and post-food consumption. They were not showing you a previous chronic longer picture. But why this test is different? Because it does not measure short-term spikes, it measures longer-term spikes. So whatever the blood glucose level of a patient has been in the previous few months will be depicted in the results, and that's why it's much easier for the doctors to understand whether it is a chronic diabetes that they are having or it is just an acute spike, which could be owing to many different reasons. So therefore, as soon as sugar enters bloodstream, it attaches itself to hemoglobin. So therefore, if hemoglobin is the protein in the blood that transport oxygen to various body parts, every kind of hemoglobin or all hemoglobin particles will have some kind of sugar attached to it. That is even with normal people. But only when this amount becomes too high, it is categorized as pre-diabetic or in fact proper diabetes. So the beauty of this test is that it will measure the percentage of your RBCs or the red blood cells that have sugar coating on them, or which can be called as glycated. Glycated means induced with sugar. And therefore, they provide you a percentage which is a long-term percentage. So typically, the higher your blood glucose levels, the more dangerous it becomes. And that threshold is approximately around 5.7% and below. And anything above that is probably an alarm because it indicates something that is not normal with your blood glucose level. So therefore, this test will give you an average blood glucose picture for the last 2 to 3 months. And that's why it's revolutionary, because doctors can have your medical history and hence treatments could be done ASAP, sooner. Apart from that, some people also say that it has certain problems as well, because if it is only investigating into previous 3 or 4 months of your data, maybe immediate or short-term spikes are not taken care of. So that's probably the only drawback that people are speaking about. But apart from that, given that it is giving you a broader data, a longer picture of human body, hence treatment also becomes much more sensible and it becomes much more effective here. So that's what the article talks about. And the last article of the day is page 11, a very interesting revelation. This is coming to us from a laboratory, rather an observatory, a scientific experimenting laboratory that's referred to as Ice Cube Neutrino Observatory. What is the beauty about this observatory? Now, the beauty about this observatory is that it is a project that is conducted under CERN, which we see European Organization of Nuclear Research. The purpose of the project is to create Ice Cube Observatory. It is one of the only kind. Now before that also we had one that was known as Amanda Laboratory. This is the second one, state of the art, that is situated in the South Pole, basically in Antarctica. What does it do? Now it is trying to, or in fact it has put small, very complicated, sophisticated sensors under the snow in a large piece of land. Now these sensors are very sensitive to any kind of stimulation, and hence they are able to understand the energy or the small energy that is being radiated by neutrino. But what is a neutrino? Let's understand. Neutrinos are those kind of particles that are electrically neutral. And their mass is so small that for a very long time they were considered to be in fact zero. But today we understand that no matter how small they are, no matter how tiny these particles are, no matter how subatomic they be, but they can pave future research into understanding the emissions that are done by larger cosmic objects in the universe. Because what is happening now, these neutrinos are such light particles that they rarely ever interact with any other particle, and therefore they have also earned the name of being called ghost particles because of the fact that they are neutral and their presence is very difficult to be detected. Now, the more collecting area that you observe, the higher chances you have of spotting these neutrinos. The good thing is here the laboratory, like the illustration is showing, has implanted its small investigating cameras and sensors all across the snowfield. So this helps in capturing tiniest of movement or tiniest of reaction that the neutrinos are undergoing near the South Pole. Hence, what is happening, if these tiny particles or ghost particles are able to create any kind of radiation, if they are able to create any kind of reaction, then it can be a very good footprint for us to actually understand in future that what is the mystery behind the origin of highest energy cosmic rays. A small, tiny object like neutrino could therefore show the behavior of various kind of energies and cosmic rays that are radiated by even bigger particles, and therefore spotting neutrinos is a wonderful, you can say, discovery that the Ice Cube Observatory has highlighted. It says that there are very high energy neutrinos that are deposited deep down below, ice deep in the Antarctic surface. And for the first time, in fact, the wonderful thing is that if you just try to investigate where have they come from, then their source happens to be locations in the Milky Way galaxy. So the first time these particles were observed, similar particles, they had come from the Milky Way galaxy, which means there is absolutely a similarity. And we can also say that therefore, if neutrino interacts with ice supporting sensors, then it means that they are capable of causing some radiation. If we are able to gauge this radiation, it will talk about how to understand the radiations in real time of much larger and more complex cosmic bodies. That's what the article talks about. And now let's proceed with the two questions of the day. The first question here says, critically examine how the system of open book examinations can develop better learning skill among students. So we need to talk about the concept, we need to talk about the entire phenomena behind the concept of creating better, innovative, skill-based analytical learning, not rote learning, and hence what should be the method. And if you're critically analyzing, let's highlight certain challenges that come with a part of it, like teaching students, changing curriculum, investing in infrastructure. Second question says, countries of the global south have been facing additional burden of climate mitigation. Discuss. Indeed, we are talking about ecological imperialism that's happening nowadays. So we can talk about the discovery of the IPCC study. We can highlight how the two paradoxes exist. On the one hand, sometimes the poor countries are facing higher burden of climate crisis, poverty. At the same time, they are also required to do more climate change or more climate mitigation initiatives. We can talk about offshoring of waste to poor countries. We can talk about the carbon credit rating system, all of that. And hence we can talk about the injustice and how it needs to be taken care of. So on that note, I'll take your leave for today's session. I hope you enjoyed it. See you soon with many such interesting sessions in future. Thank you.